Football Playbook, presented by the Pigskin Podcast Network. Your source for team news, draft needs, player profiles and rankings, full Senior Bowl, Combine, and NFL draft coverage. News, analysis, discussion. It's in the playbook. Now, here is your host, sports journalist Bill Alvstad, and featured analyst Keith Myers. Hey, Pro Football Playbook Podcast listeners. Thanks for joining us. My name is Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers, and we're continuing our series on our look around the NFL to team roster analysis, basically. We're looking at position groups on every roster and finding the strengths, weaknesses, and kind of where everyone's at, what they did in the offseason, what they did in the draft, and what the expectation level is heading into the season. So this week, we're doing everything alphabetical. We're at the Cincinnati Bengals, first up here. And
this has got to be.
What are your overall impressions?
I would say overall, before we jump into the team, this has been the show looking at all the 16 versions of this that we're going to do that I have been excited about the most since we came up with our schedule, because Cincinnati and Cleveland are two really, really interesting teams, both of which are going to be good, but they're also interesting besides just being good. So I've been looking forward to this for weeks. So
Cincinnati surprised a lot of folks by getting all the way to the Super Bowl last year.
They did.
You were one of them. You thought that they were going to be really good, but you had question marks throughout the year, and it really became evident maybe in the last just 3 weeks that this team was going to surge and kind of take control. And they really did. I mean, Joe Burrow just kind of took that team and willed them into the playoffs as the leader that he is and is becoming.
If Joe Burrow didn't impress you last year, then you're probably a fan of a rival team, and you're looking for flaws, because he played behind, arguably the worst offensive line in the NFL. Yeah, and put together monster stats, and just was a true leader in every sense of the way.
Yeah, I mean, I caught the most of 3 separate games that they played last year. And in one game, they had like 10 sacks against him. And another game, they had 7 sacks against him. I think one, it was 6 or something like that. I mean, it was just horrible. And, he's not the most elusive guy in the world, but their offensive line was just special bad. But the cool thing was with Cincinnati is they went out and they knew that. They addressed it head on in the offseason. I thought they did an adequate job to kind of reset that offensive line, bringing in Ted Karras and Alex Kappa to play guard. And then they basically walked into a deal with La'el Collins after the Cowboys jettisoned him. And that was, I think, arguably their best pickup of the offseason.
Yeah, I love their offseason. And I love it because they went and looked at – this was a Super Bowl team. This was a Super Bowl team that was –
Well, you were excited. You were excited, because they had some cap space, and then they were going to have this draft, and they were already really good. And so you were kind of talking about them last November as being, well, I'm not quite sure this year, but next year they're going to be even better.
Well, yeah, but
here we are.
Last year was not supposed to be their year. Last year was that building year where they were going to show us that they were who they were and that they were the team, right? The next team. And then they were going to have all that draft capital and all of that cap room to go finish building the roster this offseason so that next year they are the team. And that's what they did. They were ahead of schedule a year ago, and that they made the Super Bowl because, Joe Burrow is just simply better than, I think a lot of us ever gave him credit for being this early. But they still had all that cap space and all that draft capital to go finish building their roster. And now they were a Super Bowl team a year ago, and they took what was their biggest weakness, which was the offensive line, and they strengthened it at 3 different spots. Yeah. It's now kind of a strength.
And they did the same thing with the defensive backs.
Yeah, this is a team that they are poised to just be an absolute force in, this coming season.
Yeah. And it's interesting because most draft pundits really aren't even ranking them in the top 4 or 5 teams in the NFL right now. When you go look, it's like Buffalo, and then you've got the Rams, and then you've got Kansas City, and then everyone's talking about Green Bay, and maybe these guys are getting tossed in there at the 5th, maybe 6th spot. What are your thoughts on where they're positioned this year?
Right now, it's Buffalo and Cincinnati. And I don't put anyone else up there.
Do you think that the Rams kind of diminished slightly?
I do.
And they kind of backed into that Super Bowl a little bit.
Well, no, I don't think they backed into anything. They were, they were the most talented team, top to bottom. You know what I mean? Like as far as getting 11 guys on offense and defense on the field, they were the most talented team in the NFL, I believe. They didn't have a lot of depth last year, but they were the team that everyone should have bet on to win it all, and they did. But they lost some talent. They had depth problems last year. They just happened to get lucky that they were one of the least injured teams in the NFL
for 2 or 3 years running too. Except for Cam Akers.
True.
That was interesting.
But
they overcame that. I mean, I was impressed with that.
They did, and he came back, in the playoffs, and then they lost, Woods, their wide receiver, but they did so right as they were acquiring
Beckham.
That's I'm like, wait, the name there it is, Beckham
Jr.
So to me, I look at, I'm like, they got incredible injury luck, and everything just kind of worked out. Though they lost a bunch of talent that they weren't able to replace. They replaced a couple pieces, but they lost more than they
lost Woods.
Added.
They didn't re-sign Beckham. They lost whatchamacallit, their pass rusher.
Mm-hmm. And then they replaced some of that, but not nearly all of it. And then you got to think of, like, they can't have just that insane of injury luck every year. Like eventually it's going to, the law of averages is going to catch up to them, and they're going to regress to the mean as far as that goes. And
I agree. So you see Cincinnati up further closer to the top with Buffalo.
Absolutely.
They're like 1-2. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to get to the other teams, and we'll have a chance to talk about those guys. But let's talk about their draft. We kind of know what they did in the offseason with free agency and so forth. What did they do in the draft to kind of address the remaining spots, and how do you think they did? You got Daxton Hill with the 31st pick overall to start with.
It's one of the things about making the Super Bowl is that you pick late in every round, and that makes it a little harder for teams to go through and add. They're not at the top of the draft. They're not adding, a Kayvon Thibodeau or someone like that. They're picking 31st, and that makes it a little harder to go out and get, impact players. But I thought,
they picked a great draft to pick 31st, because this is a draft that's deep, that went, 50, 60 players deep.
It wasn't particularly great at the very top, but it was super deep in the middle. As far as like starting about mid round 1 into, like you said, 50, 60 players. That's a great group of guys without a lot of clear shelves where their drop offs were. And I like what
their first 2 picks were with defensive backs, which is great, because they got young. The Daxton Hills can come in right away and provide some rotation with Mike Hilton, which I think is an underrated corner, originally from Pittsburgh, and I think that's a really nice combo in the slot for them. And then Cam Taylor-Britt is a around 6 foot, 195 corner with a lot of upside as far as physicality. Likes to play physical, likes to get his hands on folks, and he's a great tackler.
He's a guy that's going to come in and instantly challenge Eli Apple. And push for playing time in that spot.
That's a true statement. and or Trey Flowers.
Well, true.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Trey Flowers was one of those like.
And Chidobe Awuzie is the other guy there. Just
yeah, I mean,
that out there.
Trey Flowers looked terrible in Seattle. They cut him mid-season and was like, get out of here. He ended up in Cincinnati where they played a defensive style that more fit his skill set, and he wasn't terrible. I mean, he was a key contributor in that defense that got them to where where they were.
But the defensive backs were the weakness on that defense.
Oh yeah.
But I think that they did enough here to kind of address that.
Well, I think the other thing that they did to address that was their third round pick, which is Zachary Carter, because anytime that you can add to your pass rush, it makes your cornerbacks better.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's going to be rushing from the inside, so that's a great pick for them because he was kind of that defensive end / 3-tech guy at Florida. I think they're going to primarily use him inside.
Yeah, he'll be inside and outside. I mean, probably a 5-tech in the against the run, 3-tech against the pass. That's a good pick. It's better. Yeah,
that's a good pick. Okay, so you expect them to be right back in the conversation with Buffalo, Kansas City. There's the AFC, dude. By the time we get done with this whole thing, we're going to have like 6 or 7 teams out of the AFC that could eventually be in the AFC Championship game.
Is there any division in the NFC that the Cincinnati Bengals would not be the favorite to win?
Well, Keith, I mean, you could say the NFC West, and you could say they'd have to get by the Rams because the Rams, people discount the Rams quite a bit. People discounted the Rams last year. In fact, I was one of them. I didn't think that the Rams were going to be that great, and whatchamacallit, their quarterback had a career year last year.
Stafford was great.
I think that was the difference maker. So I'm not sure, but boy,
honestly,
I don't know that
Cincy in the NFC.
Here's the better question. The better question is, who is going to discount the Cincinnati Bengals this year and
every single person in the media apparently.
Yeah. Well,
because they're not.
Yeah, you're right.
Talking about them. No one's talking about them. No one's they're like, oh well, we've got. Of course,
would they be
Kansas
favored over Green Bay and
yes.
in the North?
Yes.
How about that's it?
Tampa?
That's all I got.
Yes. I mean, those are the only two. The only two.
I think the NFC is diminished that much. I agree.
The NFC's not.
Of course, Cincinnati. We're not trying to discount Cincinnati. You already placed them as the top 2 team in the NFL, not just in conference. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you're right.
What I'm trying to say is I think other media are, because they're not like, people want to pick.
We're not used to saying we're not used to saying Cincinnati out loud as being a perennial contender.
Yeah, and here they are. And here they are. This roster is built really well. They were a Super Bowl team last year, and then they significantly improved since last year.
And we haven't even talked about like Jamar Chase. Like, how good is that player? Like, how good can he be?
If you were starting a team right now and you could pick any wide receiver in the NFL, is there anyone you would pick before Jamar Chase?
How old is Jamar Chase? I mean,
22.
You could say Devontae Adams, but you'd probably be lying because just the age difference and upside and just the player that he is with that height, weight, speed combo. I mean, DK Metcalf wishes that he had Jamar Chase's pure talent as a wide receiver. Now, DK Metcalf is a physical specimen. Don't get me wrong. I love DK Metcalf, and he's got all the ability, but he's yet to harness it as a football player. But Jamar Chase is a football player, and he's got Joe Burrow throwing him the ball. Yeah.
I mean, that's what my question. Is there anyone you'd rather start a team with at wide receiver if you were starting a team?
Cooper Kupp. Listen, I'm a Cooper Kupp guy just because I like the grittiness nature of Cooper Kupp and a guy that.
But he doesn't have the physical talent.
No. But chain mover, Cooper Kupp.
Sure, chain mover. And special. I mean, the guy led the NFL in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. I'm not going to discount Cooper Kupp in any way.
He's got to be in the conversation, Keith.
But if I'm starting a team, it's Jamar Chase and everybody else.
Fair.
And Cooper Kupp is part of the everybody
starting
else.
a team, quote unquote.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I mean,
All right. Let's talk about the second most interesting team in this podcast.
On the second most interesting team in their own division, and maybe the second most interesting team in the AFC right now.
What makes them very interesting to you, other than the fact that they made the blockbuster trade that everyone was waiting for this offseason? Dominoes fell. The Russell Wilson trade happened. The Green Bay quarterback signed his contract, and then stuff started moving really rapidly. Deshaun Watson all of a sudden became the hottest commodity out there. He was entertained by 4 or 5 teams that were very serious in this conversation. Without, he had the criminal liability stuff taken off the shelf for him, but he's civilly still potentially could be in trouble. And then, of course, the league itself doles out punishment that nobody really understands exactly what that entails or what the criteria is or what the level of punishment could be. It could be nothing, could be an entire year. We just don't know. Cleveland went ahead and swung for the fences anyway. They gave him a fully guaranteed $200+ million contract. Not everybody agrees with it. Not everybody likes the social implications of this deal, but here they are. Deshaun Watson's their quarterback, and they're back in the conversation.
Absolutely. So this was a team that was a playoff team 2 years ago behind Baker Mayfield. Last year, they were very disappointed. Everyone expected them to take kind of that next step and maybe win a playoff game, look like, they could push some teams, and they didn't. They didn't make the playoffs at all. And Baker Mayfield is now, he's still on the roster, but they not only traded for Watson, but they signed Jacoby Brissett to be his backup. Where's Mayfield going? But honestly, Watson is why this team's so interesting, because there is a ton of talent. There's lots of things that we're going to talk about here in the next bit, but it is Watson that makes this team a contender, because he is a genuine, legit top 5 quarterback. And people
forget, it doesn't take very long for people to forget, but he can do it all. He's a great thrower on the run. He moves the chains with his legs. He's a smart, instinctive quarterback who gets the ball to any spot on the field.
He's got a big arm.
He played on a bad team and made that happen.
Yeah, he's got a big arm. He's got an accurate arm. He throws good on the run, makes smart decisions, can get the ball out really quick if he needs to. He's the package on the field. Off the field, you already mentioned all of it. There's a lot to be disgusted by.
22 civil lawsuits.
Yep. Well,
alleging sexual assault and misconduct, and apparently the commissioner is almost done with their internal investigation, and we should hear more in the next couple of weeks. One of the
things that I look at when I look at that is I think he'll probably have a suspension, but it'll be less than a lot of people are suspecting, because when it went
4 games, that's my prediction. Which is less than people.
I'm predicting 2.
Wow.
Because
I think it's 4, because I think 2, everyone will just be like, what? Why even do 2? If you're only going to do 2, why do? I think it's going to be 4, because that at least impacts a quarter of the season, and it kind of quiets the crowd a little bit as far as the punishment crowd.
I don't know if the NFL wants to quiet the crowd. I think they want everybody to be talking about it. They want everyone to be fired up about it, whether they are fired up that he's going to play and be good, or they're fired up because how can they let this guy play? I know that's why I think it's going to be 2.
Well, nobody knows, right? Because there's no evaluation criteria. There's no standard that we're basing this on. This is just like, who knows? We're speculating. All right. Okay. So if Deshaun Watson plays throughout the year, let's talk about that team. But for the sake of this conversation, we can worry about talking about the suspension later. Let's talk about Deshaun Watson's on the team. He's the quarterback. He's thrown to Amari Cooper.
Let's talk about that trade
where
they got Amari Cooper for a 5th round pick. That's like just highway robbery.
Yeah.
Especially given what happened immediately afterward when you saw guys going for 2 first-round picks and all these getting these massive contracts, and everyone was like, "Oh, you don't want to take on Amari Cooper's contract," and suddenly his contract is like a massive bargain, and you only give up a fifth-round pick for him. It's just an incredible deal. Like, it just worked out really well for Cleveland.
The quarterback market situation for Baker Mayfield didn't work out for the team so much. That's a big distraction that hung around them like an albatross and still does. Don't know exactly what's going to happen there.
Yeah,
they're going to eat a bunch of that. They're going to eat a bunch of that contract, and he's going to get shipped for virtually nothing. That's just the way it is sometimes in the NFL. But that's his value. Let's talk about the draft. So they've got Amari Cooper, they got Deshaun Watson. The rest of their offseason is whatever. But then they went out and they had a pretty decent draft. They ended up still with all the stuff they shipped out for Watson. They still ended up having a decent draft. Martin Emerson, I thought, was underrated at cornerback. That fills a need. Defensive end Alex Wright, I think, is a great pick. David Bell is an underrated wide receiver from Purdue at 99 overall. I thought that was a great value. And the best value in the draft, Keith, defensive tackle Perry and Winfrey going 108 overall to the Cleveland Browns in a spot that they needed the most. They got the player that they needed.
I mean, okay. Anyone that listens to the show know that you and I both love Perry and Winfrey. He's a defensive tackle. He is not an every down player because he's not going to stand up against the run, but he is a penetrator. He's a guy that will get upfield. He will disrupt quarterbacks. He will make quarterbacks move off their spot because he's very quick and gets up the field very well. You cannot have enough guys like him as pass rushers on the interior. He makes all the other pass rushers better by his ability to get up and disrupt the quarterback. That pick at 108 is incredible. That might be the best pick in the entire draft, in my opinion.
It's up there. I mean, value
combination of value. Yeah.
So, and then you pair that with Jadeveon Clowney just re-signed for a 1-year deal. Tivin Bryan is sitting there next to Perry and Winfrey, and then Myles Garrett is on the other side. So you get that group together, and Perrian's in that rotation and stuff. Their defense all of a sudden got wicked scary up front.
Yeah, so it's 3rd and 12, and you're looking at Clowney and Garrett on the outside, and Elliott and Winfrey on the inside, and you're just like, no thanks, I'm out.
Yeah, well, and then you got Denzel Ward on the backside with Grant Delpit, one of the best young safeties, Greg Newsome in the slot, and Martin Emerson, their new cornerback they just signed. That defense all of a sudden got really good, and if Deshaun Watson plays, their offense is no slouch. I mean, it really is pretty decent. They were a player or two away if they had a premier quarterback. And they got their premier quarterback, and then they got a couple players.
They got what they needed.
They got what they needed. So they got more talented and
relevant. They got more talented and deeper.
Yeah. So they're a top 10 team.
Yeah.
Just in the off season, just moving. So you could say they were probably a 15 team. They were disappointing last year. Baker Mayfield had a bad year, got injured, blah, 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 blah. All of a sudden now they're a top 10 team. They haven't even taken a snap, and they have potential to work their way up into a top 5 team in the conversation. I mean, in an AFC conference that is way better overall than the NFC. If you throw this team in the NFC, let's have the same conversation we had with Cincinnati. You throw this team in the NFC, they're probably a top 3 team right now.
Yeah, they are.
Deshaun Watson plays.
If Deshaun Watson plays.
And that's going to be the conversation until we find out, because that the whole entire season really hinges for this team and Deshaun Watson. If he doesn't play, they're going to be an average team. If he plays, they're relevant and in the conversation right now.
If he doesn't play, is that Jacoby Brissett getting all those snaps, or have they held on to Baker Mayfield, and he ends up as the starter until Deshaun Watson suspension's over?
Wow. Can you imagine a deadline trade of Baker? That would be interesting if he played well for the first 4 or 5 games.
I think that a market never really materialized for Baker after the Deshaun Watson trade. Like once that happened, everyone's like, oh, well, now where's Baker going to go? And by then, everyone had kind of had their team, and the two teams that are really quarterback hungry right now being Seattle and Carolina, both don't appear to be teams that are, hey, let's make a trade and get a quarterback.
Not for $18 million anyway.
No, not for his roster or for his contract and all of that. He's just not that good, and neither of those teams is ready to compete right now. So why would you make that trade, lose draft capital or other assets in order to get a guy that's not that good and your team's not ready to win anyway? So Cleveland didn't have any options, and now it's like, okay, do they cut him and just get nothing for him, or do they hold on to him as a hedge in case Watson's suspension comes back heavy, or you just hang on to him, bring him into camp, and you wait for somebody to have an injury and then come, calling to Cleveland going, hey, you got this guy. We need, we thought we were a competitor, but our quarterback just went down, give us Mayfield so we can, have some hope. And maybe so they can get more for him in that situation. I don't know. It's a weird spot for Mayfield.
So a couple more players, fringe players I just want to talk about, and then we can wrap this up. They drafted the premier kicker in the draft at 124 overall, which I thought was probably a couple rounds early, but you go up and get your guy. That's what they did. Cade York. Jerome Ford, I think, is an undervalued running back from Cincinnati, 156 overall. I thought that was a good value. Mike Woods at 202. Don't know much about him, but Isaiah Thomas, the edge from Oklahoma, at 223, I thought was a good value. Special teams kind of player, gives you some speed around the edge, and a center to round it out. So all in all, I thought Cleveland, if you just, I gotta say this, if you discount the civil stuff with Deshaun Watson, I thought they had a stellar A+ offseason.
Yeah.
And you just have to throw that little asterisk in. You just do. I do, because I like to. Listen, half the NFL is female fans, and you got to respect that. You've got to understand the implications there. And I'm just saying, I need to be able to say that. I need to say, listen, there's an asterisk here. I don't know what's going to happen. Absolutely. There needs to be some sort of punishment from the NFL on this thing. I think that you just do. Yeah, he was traded to a different team. That doesn't matter. That team that traded for him knew exactly what they were getting themselves into with this. You got to dole out punishment as you would if he was still with Houston. And I think that, regardless of the criminal stuff, the civil stuff is still out there. Maybe he settles it, maybe he doesn't. I have no idea. But
yeah, I mean, the criminal part of it, the way that it went down suggests that is part of why I think that it's going to come down lesser rather than more in terms of the suspension.
Just from the sheer fact that they didn't have enough evidence to prosecute.
It wasn't just that they didn't have enough evidence to prosecute. It's that they didn't have enough evidence to convince a jury that something might have happened.
Yes, but we know the civil criteria is less than the criminal.
Not to a grand jury when they're talking about indicting it, because this isn't beyond a reasonable doubt or any of that. The prosecution gets to present evidence, and that's it. They get to tell the only story. They get to present 100% of everything that the jury looks at. There's no defense. And they said no. There's nothing here. And that is telling, because what that doesn't mean he didn't do anything. I am not making that claim, and I'm not saying he shouldn't be punished, but I'm saying that the prosecution and the investigators could not show any evidence that anything happened, other than the testimony of the people. And that made the grand jury said there's nothing here. And the fact that all 22 women are
represented
by the same lawyer who is
I thought that was a strategic mistake.
A known ambulance chaser does not help their case in any way. And I do not want to come off as someone who's defending him, because I'm not. I think
but at the same time, you don't want to come off with as somebody that's convicting him in public opinion either, without knowing all the facts.
I'd rather do that before I defend someone in the situation. I'm simply trying to present the facts that I know, and that is that the grand jury said there's nothing here, and we've got and then you've got the fact that all of them are represented by the same lawyer, and it's going to be hard for the NFL's investigation to come up with anything that the district attorney couldn't, that's going to justify a bigger suspension. So it's all going to come down to optics.
Yeah. So it's hard to punish somebody for behavior that's not criminal. That's just bad,
disgusting,
quote unquote, bad boy behavior. I'll just leave it at that. It's hard to punish somebody. It's hard to suspend somebody and fine them, $2 million or whatever. It's hard. So let's just leave it at that.
I was going to say, personally, looking at all of this and my own beliefs in this, I had kind of hoped that there had been something that the grand jury could hang their hat on and indict him, even if ultimately he ended up not getting convicted because they didn't have enough. Because to me, that justifies the suspension, and I think he should get one. But I at this point, I'm like, I don't know if he's going to get suspended at all. I'm thinking 2 games. You think 4, but either way, you and I are both thinking he plays a considerable role this coming season.
I do.
So,
all right, let's get out of here. Thanks.
Let's get out of here.
Thanks, Keith. Good conversation. Cleveland and Cincinnati off the books.
Great teams.
Yeah.
Great off seasons.
Next time we're talking about the Dallas Cowboys. Come around for that, and the Denver Broncos. Both teams maybe heading in opposite directions, Keith. So find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at Alvstad NFL. Find the show at PF_playbook, and look up the show. Find it on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube. Please subscribe and share. Until next time, take care, guys. Thanks for listening to the Pro Football Playbook Podcast. Follow Keith at Myers NFL. Bill is at Alvstad NFL. The show is at PF_playbook. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or YouTube, and at our website, profootballplaybook.co.